Okay, we have talked that we have discussed actually that there are the middle oblongata are called extrapyramidal tracts. Is it clear? Who can tell me? Please, anyone. Which one is extrapyramidal tract? Which are the extrapyramidal tracts? Can anyone?
স্যার যে ট্র্যাক্ট গুলা স্যার পিরামিড দিয়ে যায় না, মেডুলার পিরামিড দিয়ে যায় না, ওইগুলাই হচ্ছে মানে
ডিকাজেট
স্যার
করে না,
এক্সট্রা।
যায় না, না ডিকাজেট করে না। আমরা আরো সুন্দর করে বলবো ডিকাজেট টু দ্য অপোজিট সাইড করে না। হ্যাঁ, ডিকাজেট মানে হচ্ছে ক্রস করা। হ্যাঁ, যাওয়া এক জিনিস, ইট ক্যান গো, যেমন কিছু ফাইবার আছে এটা যাবে এদিক দিয়ে, ইট উইল বাট দে উইল নট ডিকাজেট। সো দ্য ট্র্যাক্টস, the descending motor tracts which doesn't decassate at the pyramid of the middle oblongata are called extrapyramidal tracts. Are the tracts, descending motor tracts which decassates at the middle oblongata to the opposite. Decassate বললেই বোঝায় to the opposite side, এটা বোঝায়। তবু আরো ভেঙে বলতে decassates to the opposite side or crosses to the opposite side at the pyramid of the middle oblongata are called pyramidal tracts. Finally দেখো, আমরা আরেকটি ছবি দিয়ে দেখি। এখানে আমরা আরো একটা কনসেপশন, উই হ্যাভ ব্রট অ্যানাদার কনসেপশন টু দিস, ইজ দ্য আপার মোটর নিউরন, INN, UMN or upper motor neuron, INN or interneuron, and LMN or lower motor neuron, right? Now you can see we are calling the pyramidal cells of the cerebral cortex as the upper motor neuron, and the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord as the lower motor neuron. And in between, there is another group of small neurons or interneurons, that is, these are all Golgi type 2. These interneurons, you know, Golgi type 2, I have told you, according to the length of the axon of the neuron, we can divide the neurons into two types. One is Golgi type 1, where the long axons are there, and one is the small Golgi type 2, where the axons are very short. So interneurons fall into these Golgi type 2 variety, whereas the upper motor and lower motor neurons usually fall into the Golgi type 1 variety. And these Golgi type 1 neurons are usually excitatory. One big exception is the Purkinje fibers of the cerebellum, which are, though Golgi type 1, are inhibitory. We have to remember, when we must remember that though Purkinje cells of the cerebellum are Golgi type 1 neurons, but they are inhibitory in nature. Other than that, most of the Golgi type 1 neurons are excitatory, and most of the Golgi type 2 neurons are inhibitory in nature. লিখে রাখো, এগুলো লিখে রাখো, এগুলো কিন্তু সামারি। এবং মনে রাখবে, you remember that neuroanatomy is a matter of summarization, because there's a very detailed learning. So if you can't summarize these things, you'll be matching or mixing up the information with another group of information, and that would be catastrophic, you know. So what I have told, that most of the Golgi type 1 neurons are excitatory except the Purkinje cell present in the cerebellum, and most of the interneurons are inhibitory. And one of the example of interneuron, because these are Golgi type 2, most of the Golgi type 2 neurons are inhibitory. For example, interneurons, right? Next question: is these pyramidal cells only example of upper motor neuron, or is these lower motor neuron only present? Is the neuron only present in the spinal cord anterior horn? No, we would like to extend the definition of upper motor neuron now. I hope that you are in a stage to understand what is upper motor neuron and what is lower motor neuron now. Now let us extend the conception of the upper motor neuron a bit further. Upper motor neurons, of course, they are the pyramidal cells of the cerebral cortex and their axon, right? But some cells start from the basal ganglia, a part of the brain, cerebrum, and also they are present in the let me remember it. I've just forgot. Basal ganglia is one. Anyway, I'll tell you another part. I just forgot somehow. that, oh yes, brainstem. Some of them are present in the brainstem. So basal ganglia and brainstem parts like substantia nigra, these are the red nucleus. These are the present in the subcortical region, which also act as the upper motor neuron beginning. So not only that they start from the cerebral cortex, they can start from the basal ganglia and other parts of the brainstem. I'll tell you later. I just forgot somehow. So just remember that these are the upper motor neurons. Similarly, lower motor neuron, the example of lower motor neuron is not only the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord, but similar or homologous cells, lower motor neurons are present in where? Lower motor neurons are present in the brainstem. That is for the cranial nerves motor fiber, motor nuclei. Cranial nerves motor nuclei. So write it down. Lower motor neuron example is firstly, you have to tell first of all the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. This is the first example of lower motor neuron. And then if the teacher then asks you, is there any homologous lower motor neuron cells in the brain? It is present in the spinal cord. I'm accepting your answer, but is there any homologous cell, lower motor neuron cells in the brain? In that case, you have to say that yes, sir, they are present in the midbrain, pons and whatever, that is in the brainstem. There are some motor nuclei for the cranial nerves, from where the motor nuclei, you know, some cranial nerves are motor, some cranial nerves are sensory, purely sensory. Some neurons are motor cranial nerves are mixed, like vagus. Vagus is at the same time motor, sensory, and also carries the autonomic fiber. So it's a mixed nerve, right? So that in that case, there would be a nucleus for the vagus here, from where in the medulla oblongata, from where the vagus nerve motor fiber starts, not from the anterior horn spinal cord, because those are cranial nerves, and cranial nerves originate from the brain. So they have to originate from the brain, and particularly the medulla oblongata for the vagus. So there are some motor nuclei present in the brainstem for the cranial nerves, and those motor nuclei are also lower motor neurons. Is it clear? Can anyone tell me what are the examples of lower motor neurons? Can please, anyone please, in your own language. No thing, nothing to hesitate. Anyone please.
Anterior horn cells of spinal cord, sir.
This is one example, right? And what are the homologous lower motor neuron cells present in the brain?
The
Motor nuclei
The
of
lower
cranial
motor
nerve.
neurons of the cranial nerves.
Yes.
nerves in the brainstem.
Brainstem motor nuclei for the cranial nerves, right? That is another. Similarly, what is the example of upper motor neuron? একটা তো বলতেই হবে, you have to tell at least one. That is the pyramidal cells of the cerebral cortex. Another example, homologous cells present in the basal ganglia and brainstem, right? Homologous cells present in the basal ganglia and brainstem. এটাও হচ্ছে upper motor neuron. তাহলে upper motor neuron is the first order neuron in the descending motor tract, a descending motor pathway. And there is second order neuron is the interneuron, which are also present in the anterior horn cell. Interneurons are also present in the anterior horn cell, but they are very, very short, so short that there might be even 200, up to 200 interneurons between the upper motor and lower motor neurons. They have shown it for simplicity one only, but there might be up to 200 interneurons in a series. I've shown you the series connection in the last class. So in a series, there might be up to 200 interneurons, but all those 200 interneurons would be considered as one. That is the second order neuron. First order neuron in the motor pathway is the upper motor neuron, which crosses to the opposite side. Then the interneuron altogether, the number may vary from 1 to 200, whatever the number is, all of them are called interneurons, second order neurons. And the third order neuron starts from the same anterior horn cell, but different cells. Interneurons and lower motor neurons are not the same cells present. Now what happens? These lower motor neuron cell body is located in the anterior horn, as you can see, and its axons comes out as the anterior root of the spinal nerve or motor root of the spinal nerve, and there is posterior root or sensory root which joins together at the intervertebral foramen, you know it, and there they form the trunk of the spinal nerve, you know it. Then these trunks divides into ventral and dorsal rami, right? And they go to the muscles and the target organs, skin and muscles everywhere. Because by the time the anterior root and posterior root have joined to form the trunk, they become mixed. So the ventral rami and dorsal rami are also mixed, right? Is it clear? I've shown it in you in the earlier class, in the first or second class. Can you remember it? Or should I repeat it again? আরেকবার বলবো এটা, জিনিসটা মনে আছে তোমাদের?
স্যার মনে আছে।
মনে আছে, good. তাহলে দেখো, so the lower motor neuron is reaching the target. Here the lower motor neuron's target, somatic nervous system, is the skeletal muscle only. So they only will reach the skeletal muscle. Is it clear? This is regarding the pyramidal tract. Very simplified. I have not talked about how they come to the midbrain and where through they pass, because these are not discussed. Parts of the midbrain you don't know yet. Where through the pass through the in the pons, where through they pass in the medulla oblongata. Just I've told you that they decussets at the pyramid part and goes to the opposite side, right? But if I need to show you, if I can show you it again here, as I have shown you yesterday, say this one, this one is a pyramidal cell, right? I've shown you in the last class. Then this pyramidal cell's axon is going down through the corona radiator. Just learn the name, corona radiator. This part through which I'm going now is called the corona radiator. Then they grow through the internal capsule part. This now where I am is called internal capsule. Then is the midbrain, then is the pons, then is the medulla oblongata, and at the pyramid they cross to the opposite side. So now you can understand these same fibers, they are all continuous. Not that these pyramidal cell body is located here and suddenly they come to the spinal cord or suddenly they come to the pyramid. No, they are continuous and they go through this thing that is called corona radiator, then internal capsule, then midbrain, then pons, then medulla oblongata, and at the pyramid of the medulla oblongata they cross to the opposite side, right? Is it clear?
Yes,
okay, just keep in mind, you'll understand what is internal capsule, we'll understand what is coronary radiator later, but have just this idea that will help you to understand these things later when we will be discussing the details of the cerebrum. Then you will understand in details, but have an idea. What I need to tell you, and what I always tell you, that learning of neuroanatomy is very much different than learning of other parts of body, because if there is a bit discontinuation, you can manage in abdomen, in case of thorax. Say for example, there are 8 attachments in a bone. If you can remember 5 or 6, the teacher will be satisfied, and you will be satisfied also. Yes, I have done most of that. But in case of neuroanatomy, even if you miss a single line, say for example, if we remain unaware that the same pyramidal cells axon passes through corona radiator, then internal capsule, then you will not be able to understand how these things are actually maintaining the control over the outer opposite side of the body's muscles, voluntary control. So this is a very simplified example. There are so many circuits in nervous system that if you just miss one part of the circuit, you'll be never be able to manage to understand the rest part of the circuit. That's why studying neuroanatomy is very easy in the first instance, but to understand and to grasp it is very tough if you don't try or give enough time. That is very important. Give enough time to neuroanatomy, and it would be a great wonder. Like Alice in the Wonderland, like that, you'll be in a wonderland of knowledge and joy. I tell you, I guarantee you that you'll be in a wonderland of joy if you study neuroanatomy in a little details and trying to understand in a notion or motion to try to understand the meaning of what uh, these circuits mean. These are not merely the circuits, these are your lifelines, your life understanding of your life. So you must be very serious in learning these things. Okay, next point. Next, let us go to the next point, the extrapyramidal tracts. As I have told you, in case of pyramidal tract, motor cortex straightway goes to the spinal cord through corticospinal tract. That's why the pyramidal tract are also called corticospinal or corticobulbar. I told you corticospinal or corticonuclear, same name, corticonuclear and corticospinal. You can easily understand corticospinal. What does it mean? Cerebral cortex to spinal cord. But what is corticonuclear or corticobulbar? Those nuclei of the motor nuclei of the cranial nerves present in the brainstem are called bulb, B-U-L-B, bulb or nucleus, right? So the name comes that corticonuclear or corticobulbar actually means that they are originating from the nuclei of the motor cranial nerve nuclei of the motor nuclei of the cranial nerves present in the brainstem. So corticonuclear means they are originating from the brainstem motor cranial nerve nuclei, and corticospinal means they are originating from the cerebral cortex pyramidal cells directly to the spinal nerve, while cerebral cortex to the nuclei, and then they go downwards. Of the extrapyramidal tracts, and none of them cross at the pyramid of the medulla oblongata. Now let's see these in details, a bit details. There are so many other parts, but we are going to show you that. Motor cortex, straightway they are not going to the spinal cord. Instead, they are going to the red nucleus. They are going to the cerebellum, from cerebellum to the red nucleus, from the red nucleus to the cerebrospinal tract to the spinal cord. Similarly, all these information are coming to the reticular formation, and from the reticulospinal tract, then this is the corpus stratum and globus. These are the parts. I'm not going to detail it. Just have an idea that extrapyramidal tracts doesn't simply go from the cerebral cortex to the spinal cord. They go through a complicated circuitry. There is a complicated circuitry for the extrapyramidal tracts, and finally they reach the spinal cord. So why I'm telling it that these informations will be necessary now, what in understanding what we'll be discussing now. Let us go to that. These are all the preliminary informations needed to understand the neuromuscular spindle and neurotendinous organs. No, neuromuscular spindles and neurotendinous spindles. Before that, I asked you in the last class, why don't we generally feel that we are not wearing, why don't we feel that we are wearing the dresses unless at the time of putting it on and putting it off. কালকে তোমরা বলেছিলে টেম্পারেচার ডিফারেন্স এটা সেটা, বলো দেখি আজকে আরেকবার বলো চিন্তা করে।
Sir, adaptation.
আচ্ছা, অ্যাডাপ্টেশন। আচ্ছা
Adaptation properties of
হ্যাঁ,
nerve
তোমরা
fibers.
অনেক চিন্তা করছো, ভেরি গুড। আচ্ছা, তার আগে এই ছবিটা দেখো, একটা মজার ছবি। আমি তোমাদেরকে বলেছিলাম যে নিউরন আমরা দেখে বুঝতে কি হবে, নিউরনকে আমরা এইভাবে, ওই যে আমরা নিউরোগ্লিয়াতে আমরা দেখেছিলাম একটা ভেরি সিম্পল নিউরন আমরা সবসময় আঁকি, উই ড্র আ ভেরি সিম্পল নিউরন, বাট অ্যাকচুয়ালি সি দ্য নিউরন ইজ নট দ্যাট সিম্পল। এটার চেহারা দেখো আসলে এইরকম থাকে। এই দেখো, এগুলো হচ্ছে তার গ্লিয়াল সেলের সাপোর্টিং গ্লিয়াল সেল। এই যে দেখো গ্লিয়াল সেল প্রসেস, এই বড়, দিস বিগ থিংস আর, and these small things are what? This is dendrite, this is axon, axon, this one is axon, this is myelination sheath, this is internodal nodes of Ranvier, and this is the initial segment, and this part of the cell body is called axon hillock. And now you can see some small axon terminals. That means what? These are what? These are synapses, exosomatic synapses. So many exosomatic synapses are there. You know, I've told you in the last class, then axon ultimately terminates telodendrites. These are called telodendrites, like dendrite-like process at the termination of the axon. There are plenty of dendrites, like branching. These are called telodendrites, and these are called axonic buds. These are called terminal buds, right? Terminal buttons or buds. So you can see no part of the soma or cell body of a neuron is free. They are all connecting and communicating with, synapsing with the axons of other neurons. So many axons you can see. Actually, this is filled up. No space is available for synapse, right? এটা বুঝতে পেরেছো কিরকম জটিল জিনিসটা? আমরা কিন্তু একটা সহজ ছবি সবসময় মনের মধ্যে আঁকি, নিউরন বোধহয় একা একা, neuron is a solitary thing. No, it's not a solitary thing. It always combines with other neurons, either through the axon or through the dendrite or through the body. They make communication with each other. These are the synapses. So what happens when a nerve is injured? Maybe it is injured in the axon or in some part of the body. What happens? This is called neuronal stripping or synaptic axonal stripping, synaptic stripping. That means when the cell body is injured or axon is injured very close to the cell body, I told you the more distal the injury to the axon is, the less harmful it is for the cell body. The closer or the proximal, the more proximal the injury to the axon is, the more dangerous or more fatal is for the cell body. I told you in the last class. Also, if there could be direct injury to the cell body, what happens? Then there is an adhesiveness between these synapses with the cell bodies, and these adhesiveness get lost, and all these synapses strip off. That means this neuron loses its functionality as well. This is called neuronal stripping or synaptic stripping, right? মজার জিনিসটা খোঁচা খেলো এইখানে, এই these all terminals are stripped off. এখানে তাহলে তো হবেই, বা ইনজুরি হলো তাহলে তো হবেই, রাইট? জিনিস। আচ্ছা, এখন আমরা যেটা বলছিলাম রিসেপ্টরে বলতে কি, আমরা এই যে আমরা সাধারণত এই ছবিটা দেখি, ইনজুরি ক্ষেত্রে আমরা শুধু একটা কথাই বলি, ক্রোমাটোলাইসিসের কথাটা বলি, এন্ড আরেকটা কথা আমরা বলি সবসময় যে আমরা দ্য সেন্ট্রাল নিউক্লিয়াস গোজ টু দ্য পেরিফেরি। কিন্তু এই ঘটনাটা যে ঘটে এটা কিন্তু আমরা আর বলি না, এটাও কিন্তু একটা মারাত্মক ক্ষতি। দিস ইজ এ ক্যাটাস্ট্রফিক ইভেন্ট ফর দ্য axon neuron because it is losing its functionality, right? So many synapses made it possible to contribute its part. এটা কিন্তু হচ্ছে না। আচ্ছা, তোমরা শুনতে পাচ্ছ?
জি স্যার।
থ্যাংক ইউ। একটু মাঝে মাঝে শুনতে পাচ্ছি বলবা। এখন আসো আমরা যে জিনিসটা বলছিলাম, এই যে আমরা বলেছিলাম অ্যাকর্ডিং টু রিলেশনশিপ অফ দ্য রিসেপ্টর সেট আমরা বলে ফেলেছিলাম গতকাল, modalities of sensation that was also discussed according to location of the stimuli in the environment, এটাও বলা হয়েছিল। আরেকটা বলা হয়েছিল anatomically interoceptors and exteroceptors, সরি encapsulated non capsulated, সেটারও আমরা অনেক কিছু বলেছিলাম। কিন্তু আমরা এইবার আসো তোমাদের সেই প্রশ্নের উত্তর। এই যে দেখো, দিস ইজ কল্ড হেয়ার, কি আমরা কি বলেছিলাম, হেয়ার ফলিকল রিসেপ্টরস। এই যেটা হেয়ার স্কিনে থাকে, এটা একটা মেকানো রিসেপ্টর, এটা একটা টাচ র্যাপিড এন্ড আলফা এ বিটা ফাইবার দিয়ে এটা পাস করে। এইটাই হচ্ছে ইম্পর্টেন্ট কথা। কেন আমরা পোশাক পরি, এটা হয় কি, when we put on our clothes it is bent, এই হেয়ারটা বেন্ড হয়, and that starts an initial burst। তার ফলে যখন আমরা পোশাকটা পরি তখন we get the sensation that we are putting on the dress, but rest of the time this hair follicle is pressed by the cloth, usually remains pressed by the cloth. That's why they don't discharge any more impulse, but again when put off the dress then it becomes again straight and the final discharge occurs. That time again it gives the impulse and we can understand that we have put off the dress. But when the dress is put on, kept on the body, then these hair doesn't send any discharge. That's why usually we are unaware of our dresses and clothes unless during the putting it on and putting it off. মজার না জিনিসটা? এটা খুবই কিন্তু আমার কাছে মজা লেগেছে, দেখি তোমাদের সাথে শেয়ার করলাম। এটা পরীক্ষাতে তোমাদের কোনোদিনই ধরবে না, পার্টিকুলারলি আন্ডারগ্রেডদেরকে কোনোদিনই ধরবে না, কিন্তু নিজের কাছে তো ভালো লাগে, তাই না, যে আমি এখন বুঝতে পারছি কেন আমার শরীরে এটা হচ্ছে ওটা হচ্ছে, why this is happening to me। হ্যাঁ, সেটা আমার তো বুঝতে হবে। আচ্ছা, এখন আমরা সিরিয়াস পড়াতে যাই। এটা হচ্ছে একটা ফান পার্ট, কিন্তু নট আর ইররিলেভেন্ট টু দ্য আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ডিং। আর এখন আসো, এই যে নিউরোমাসকুলার স্পিন্ডল অ্যান্ড নিউরোটেন্ডিনাস স্পিন্ডল, এই দুটো জিনিস নিয়ে আমরা ডিটেলসে কথা বলবো। তার আগে আমরা কয়েকটা টার্মস আমরা বলি। নিউরোমাসকুলার স্পিন্ডল, নিউরোটেন্ডিনাস স্পিন্ডল সম্পর্কে বলার আগে ইন ডিটেলস উই হ্যাভ টু নো দিস থ্রি টার্মস। মোটর ইউনিট, হোয়াট ইজ দিস মোটর ইউনিট? কারো কোনো আইডিয়া আছে? না থাকলে আমি বলি, বলো দেখি। কোনো লজ্জার কিছু নেই, কারণ এগুলো তোমাদেরকে পড়ানো হয় না। যদি কেউ জেনে থাকো, উইথ দ্য হোপ দ্যাট ইউ মে নো। হ্যাঁ, আচ্ছা, না জানলেও কোনো সমস্যা নেই।
Sir, one motor neuron and the muscle fibers innervated by it.
ভেরি গুড। কে বললো এটা?
Sir, Omair. Sir.
হ্যাঁ,
Sir, Omair.
রোল নাম্বার কত?
Sir, 46.
46, ভেরি গুড, একদম রাইট অ্যান্সার। A single alpha motor, শুধু একটু যদি ভালো বলতে আছে, single alpha motor neuron in the anterior horn cell, anterior horn of the spinal cord and all the muscle fibers it supplies. এটা হলো একদম কমপ্লিট অ্যান্সার, যে একটা সিঙ্গেল আলফা মোটর নিউরন। এই যে আমরা বললাম যে মোটর নিউরন আছে, তাই না, আমরা এতক্ষণ ধরে অনেক কিছু বললাম। ওই যে আগের ছবিটাতে, এই যে দেখো, এই যে ছবিটাতে দেখো, এটা হচ্ছে একটা সিঙ্গেল আলফা মোটর নিউরন। এখানে কিন্তু আরো আছে, গামা মোটর নিউরনও আছে। অ্যান্টেরিয়র হর্ন সেলে আমরা বলেছিলাম না, অ্যান্টেরিয়র হর্নে কয়েক রকম নিউরন আছে। একটা হচ্ছে আলফা মোটর, একটা হচ্ছে গামা, ওয়ান ইজ আলফা মোটর, অ্যানাদার ওয়ান ইজ দ্য গামা মোটর, and another one is the eta neurons are also present. So what happens, these alpha motor neuron, a single alpha motor neuron with its axons and the number of fibers, muscle fibers it supplies is altogether called motor unit. এটা কিন্তু খুব ভালো, you have to understand it very clearly. A single alpha motor neuron with its axons and all the muscle fibers it supplies, skeletal muscle fibers it supplies, is called a single motor unit. And this motor unit may be large motor unit, may be very small motor unit. Say for example, if a single alpha motor neuron supplies 1, 2 or 3 fibers, motor muscle fibers, this is a very small motor unit. But a single alpha motor neuron may stimulate or control up to 200 muscle fibers. That is a large motor unit. Say for example, gluteus maximus. In case of gluteus maximus, there would be large motor units. But in case of intrinsic muscles of the eye or intrinsic muscles of the hand, where very precise movements are needed, the movement must be very precise. point to point. In that case, a single alpha motor neuron will control only 1, 2, or 3, like this, very small number of muscle fibers, so that the controls are very precise. Very simple thing, you can understand. Say, for example, there are 100 students and one teacher in a class. Is it possible for the teacher to control all the students? If in the same class there are 100 students and 100 teachers, or 70 teachers, which one is easier for control? Definitely the next one, the last one, right? Similarly, when there is very few fibers to be controlled by a single alpha motor neuron, that is very precise, and that is needed in case of the intrinsic muscles of the eye or intrinsic muscles of the hand, where you need to have the very precise actions. But when there is a bulk movement needed, no need to control precisely. Say, for example, gluteus maximus, you have to control the whole bulk of the muscle. That's why in that case the large motor neurons units are there. Is it clear? Okay, now let's come to the next point. What I have told you, that we need to know 3 points or 3 core concepts. Next is muscle tone. What is muscle tone? Muscle tone is the partial state of contraction of a skeletal muscle to maintain. Our students usually stops here. Our students usually stops here. Partial state of contraction of a skeletal muscle. That's all. Muscle tone. No. To maintain the optimum length, even when a force is applied to elongate the muscle. This is the complete definition of the muscle tone. At least for postgrad students, this is a complete definition you must tell. The undergrad students will, if they say that partial state of contraction of a skeletal muscle, that would be acceptable, but it is better to answer in the to maintain the optimal length even when a force is applied to elongate the muscle. So it's not that I'm elongating the muscle and it will go continuously to elongate. After optimum length, it will not try to elongate anymore. It will try to maintain its optimal length, right? So that is called muscle tone. And what is the use of this muscle tone concept? Say, for example, this previous picture, there are 1 lakh muscle fibers in it. Just have an idea that there are 1 lakh muscle fibers in biceps of brachii, right? So what will happen if these 1 lakh muscle fibers will contract at the same time? What will happen? What is your idea? There will be a very strong contraction, but you know the muscles gets fatigued. So after a few minutes or few seconds, all the muscle fibers will be fatigued at the same time, and there will be no contraction. There will be flaccid state of the muscle. Do we see this ever in our life, that the muscles are contracting then suddenly they are getting flaccid? No. That means not that all the 1 lakh muscle fibers will contract at the same time. So maybe 20,000 fibers will contract in this second, and these 20,000 muscle fibers will be fatigued 5 seconds after. In the next second, next 20,000 fibers will be contracting, and they will also maintain 5 seconds. In this way, after 5 seconds, the first group will again start to contract, and there will never ever be full flaccidness of the muscle. Did you get my point? বুঝতে পেরেছো জিনিসটা?
Yes, sir.
This is why muscle tone is a partial state of contraction. Not all the muscle fibers will contract at the same time. Rather, groups of fibers will be periodically contracting and relaxing, so that one by one all the fibers will be contracted, but not all at the same time, right? To avoid the fatigue. Acha, eta amra bujlam. Next, muscle tone. Last, third is posture. What is posture? It is the position adopted by an individual within his or her environment. It's very simple. Now you are all, most of you are sitting on a table, a chair, right? So this is the posture. When you are lying down, that is posture. When you're standing, that is also posture. So position adopted by the individual within his or her environment is posture. And this muscle tone and posture is actually dependent on a single reflex arc. Single reflex arc. What is reflex arc? What is reflex first? Tell me, please, what is reflex? Can anyone tell me what is reflex?
Involuntary movement.
Involuntary movement
Muscle
caused by the
movement.
muscles by an asynchronous discharge.
Very good. Involuntary contraction or movement of the skeletal muscle is called reflex in short. So what are the components of the reflex?
Sir, receptor, এরপর হচ্ছে স্যার effector organ, তারপর afferent and efferent nerves, আর হচ্ছে স্যার controlling center.
সবই ঠিক আছে কিন্তু উল্টা পাল্টা হয়ে গেছে। সিরিয়ালে বলো।
Sir, receptor, afferent fibers, then হচ্ছে controlling center or reflex center, তারপর হচ্ছে efferent fibers, effector organ.
Right, this is the one. So receptor, as he has mentioned, this is the receptor here, then is the afferent limb of the reflex arc, then the controlling or integration center, then is the efferent limb of the reflex arc, and finally the effector organ. Here the finally effector organ is the muscle. So this is in short about a reflex. But this is monosynaptic reflex, right? There are polysynaptic reflexes. Monosynaptic because there is only one synapse between the afferent limb and efferent limb of the reflex arc. Is it clear? So these monosynaptic reflexes are very important in maintaining the muscle tone and posture. How? Say for example, there is contraction in the muscle. Sudden contraction, you need to say for example there is pinprick, and this pinprick pain goes from the muscle to the skin, from the skin and also from the muscle to the through the afferent limbs, and there is integration, and suddenly there is a outburst to the through the efferent limb, and the muscle contracts and you have the function done. So this is called a single monosynaptic reflex, right? And these tone, and this is again the muscle tone is also maintained by this. How? Say for example, there is muscle contraction for any reason, how the muscle can contract? Either we can voluntarily contract it or involuntarily the reflex occurs. Whatever, these information goes, and eventually the control over the muscle comes through this efferent limb to maintain the length and tone of the muscle, that is contraction state of the muscle. So integrity of this monosynaptic reflex is very important for muscle tone and posture. Is it clear? Now let us come to the next point. What is the role of motor neuromuscular spindle and neurotendinous spindle? Neuromuscular spindle is an encapsulated receptor. Neurotendinous spindle is also an encapsulated receptor, right? In the classification you have seen the encapsulated receptors are neuromuscular spindles and neurotendinous spindles. Neuromuscular spindles are present in the skeletal muscle. Neurotendinous spindles are present in the tendons, and they are all mechanoreceptors. And neuromuscular spindles has a sensory modality or works against or response to stretch, that is muscle length, and change in rate of muscle length. And the neurotendinous organs also responds to the compression, that is muscle tension. What are these changes? Response to the muscle length and change in the rate of the muscle length, that is responded by the neuromuscular spindles. At compression or tension is recognized by the neurotendinous spindles. Now let us come to these things one by one. Neuromuscular spindles first, then the neurotendinous spindles. Neuromuscular spindle. You see, there are some fibers, regular fibers or extrafusal fibers, the common muscle fibers. In a muscle, in this muscle, there are some fibers, these are called extrafusal fibers. They are the common skeletal muscles. You see, there is striation, there are the nuclei, and there are the everything of a common skeletal muscle. Nuclei peripherally present, multiple nuclei peripherally present with common striation, A band, Z, I band, A band, I band. So this is an extrafusal fiber. But there are some fibers which are encapsulated, and these are called intrafusal fibers. And these are the neuromuscular spindles, and it looks like spindle. And there are two types of fibers, intrafusal fibers. One is nuclear bag fiber, and one other is nuclear chain fiber, right? Nuclear bag fiber and nuclear chain fiber. And as you can see, the structure of the nuclear bag fiber, here you can see it is swollen in the middle, and there are presence of spirally arranged nuclei in the equatorial region of the bag fiber. And nuclear chain fiber are also, they are chain-like, they are not bag-like, it's a bag-like, and they are not spirally arranged, they are vertically arranged, the nuclei, but they are also present in the equatorial region of the neuromuscular spindle, right? And you can also see that the nuclear bag fibers, part of it extends beyond the capsule, both in upper end and in lower end. But the nuclear chain fibers remains contained within the capsule. Is it clear so far? So which one is the bag fiber? This one?
Sir, no, chain fiber, sir.
It's a chain fiber. Good. It's a bag fiber. They are spirally arranged. এখন দেখো আরেকটা জিনিস দেখো। Now, these are the arrangement of the nuclear bag fiber and chain fiber. এখন এরা কি কাজ করে আর এদের সাথে কে ইনারভেশন দেয়? এখানে একটা জিনিস মনে রাখতে হবে, these bag fibers or chain fibers are innervated by gamma motor neurons present in the anterior horn cell. Gamma motor neurons. And these extrafusal fibers are innervated by, motor innervation is by alpha motor neurons. এখন আমরা কিন্তু আলাদা আলাদা করে পড়ব। এতক্ষণ আমরা বলতাম anterior horn cells. So far we have discussed these are all anterior horn cells. Now we are telling that some are gamma motor neurons, some are alpha motor neurons. The gamma motor neurons supply the intrafusal fibers, motor supply. That means when a gamma motor neuron is stimulated here, it will contract the bag fiber and chain fiber, right? Because a function of a motor neuron is to contract, cause contraction. So when the gamma motor neurons are stimulated in the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord, they will eventually cause contraction of what? The bag fibers and chain fibers, that is intrafusal fibers. Is it clear? And when the alpha motor neurons, the large alpha motor neurons are stimulated, they will cause stimulation or innervation to the extrafusal ordinary muscle fibers, and they will contract. Is it clear? এই পর্যন্ত এগুলো কিন্তু বুঝে স্টেপ বাই স্টেপ আমরা বুঝে বুঝে আগাবো, সময় লাগলেও আমাদের কোনো অসুবিধা নাই। কত মিনিট সময় আছে আমাদের ক্লাসের আজকে? দেখো তো
Sir, 10 minutes.
10 মিনিটস হয়ে যাবে ইনশাআল্লাহ। আর লাগলে না হয় 5 মিনিট আমাকে একটু দিও, এর বেশি লাগবে না ইনশাআল্লাহ। আচ্ছা, তাহলে দেখো, এই দেখো তাহলে কি বলছি, bag fibers and chain fibers are stimulated by gamma motor fibers, and alpha motor fibers stimulate the extrafusal fibers, right? Now there are some sensory fibers from here. One is called annulospiral, another called flower spray endings. Annulospiral, you can understand, annulo means circular, and spiral, annular means ring, and spiral means spirally. So these sensory endings are actually taking information from the equatorial region, and they are arranged like spirals. That's why the name is annulospiral endings. These are the sensory endings or sensory fibers, annulospiral, and these are called flower spray. Like flower, they are sprayed, and they are actually taking the sensation from the peripheral part, not from the equatorial part. So they are called flower spray endings. So what types of endings are there? Two types: annulospiral ending. Here is the annulospiral ending, and here is the flower spray endings, right? And both of these will carry the sensation, but different types, but they will carry the sensation when these intrafusal fibers are contracted, right? Because when the equatorial region is contracted, the annulospiral endings will carry the information. When the two ends will be contracted, then the information would be carried by the flower endings. When there is this very vigorous contraction, both the annulospiral and flower spray endings will act. Is it clear? So they will take the information from the intrafusal fibers, and gamma motor neurons will bring the order to contract to the intrafusal fibers. Is it clear? Because motors are to bring the order to contract. So gamma motor neurons will bring the order to contract, and there would be eventual contraction of the intrafusal fibers. And when whatever the reason is, if there is contraction of the intrafusal fibers, that would be carried by either by the annulospiral or flower spray endings to the higher areas. That contraction might be due to the contraction of the neighboring extrafusal fibers. Say, for example, these intrafusal fiber is surrounded all the way by the extrafusal fibers. So if there is contraction of the extrafusal fibers, eventually that will affect these intrafusal fibers, and there would be contraction. Or if I can somehow stimulate the gamma motor neurons, and that will cause the contraction of the intrafusal fibers itself without the contraction of the extrafusal fibers. Is it clear? এই জিনিসটা ক্লিয়ার কিনা দেখো, দুইভাবে কিন্তু এখানে কন্ট্রাকশন করা সম্ভব। ইন্ট্রাফিউজাল ফাইবারকে আমি ডিরেক্টলি I can stimulate the gamma motor neurons and directly it will contract, or I can indirectly contract the intrafusal fibers or stretch with these fibers, bring contraction to these by stimulating the extrafusal fibers through alpha motor neurons. And when all the surrounding extrafusal fibers will contract, it will have no way other than to contract along with the surrounding extrafusal fibers, and there would be contraction or change in the tension of these intrafusal fibers. Whether they are stimulated directly by the gamma motor neurons or indirectly through the alpha motor neurons, these change will be taken to the higher centers, higher areas through the annulospiral and flower spray endings. Is it clear? Is it clear
Yes,
so
sir.
far?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now let us go to the next step. এগুলো কিন্তু আসলে আমরা স্টেপ বাই স্টেপই বুঝবো। একটু দাঁড়াও, আমি একটু বইটা বের করি। বইটা কোথায় আছে? কই আছে আমার বইটা? আচ্ছা, আমি আবার বের করি, দাঁড়াও এক সেকেন্ড। বেশি চলে গেছি, আমি বের করেই রেখেছিলাম কিন্তু খুঁজে পাচ্ছি না। এত করে চলে গেলাম কেমন করে? ও, দেরি হয়ে যাচ্ছে। আচ্ছা, আমি একটু সময় নিই না, এক সেকেন্ড সময় নিই প্লিজ। তো বের করাই ছিল আমার, কিন্তু কোথায় যে চলে গেল। আচ্ছা, তোমরা বের করা ছিল। আচ্ছা, যাই হোক, আমি বলি, আমি এটা দিয়েই বলি থাক। যে দেখো, অ্যানুলোস্পাইরাল একটু মনটাই খারাপ হলো, পাচ্ছি না কেন খুঁজে। তাহলে দেখি, আমরা যেখানে ছিলাম সেখানে এসে। দেখতে পাচ্ছ তোমরা? দেখতে পাচ্ছ?
নিউরোমাস্কুলার স্পিন্ডলের ছবি আছে।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, নিউরোমাস্কুলার স্পিন্ডল। তারপর কি হবে? এখন আসো, আসলে আমি বইটা দেখাতে চাইছিলাম, বইয়ের লেখাটাও খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। এই দেখো কি ঘটনাটা ঘটবে, এই ছবিটা দেখলে তোমরা বুঝবে, কিন্তু আমি বইয়ের লেখাটা সহ দেখাতে চাচ্ছিলাম। যে দেখো, এটা খালি ডিস্টার্ব করে তোমাদের কি, যে ইউর স্ক্রিন শেয়ারিং এইসব কথাগুলো আসে তোমাদের ছবিতে, না আসে না?
নো স্যার, আসে না স্যার।
স্যার কন্ট্রোল অল্টার তারপর শিফট চাপলে চলে যাবে।
কন্ট্রোল অল্টার শিফট,
জি স্যার।
কন্ট্রোল অল্টার শিফট, কই কিছু তো হলো না। আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে।
তাহলে স্যার সাথে এইচ দেন তো স্যার।
হ্যাঁ,
কন্ট্রোল অল্টার শিফট এইচ।
শিফট
এইচ স্যার।
ও এইচ,
স্যার
ও।
তিনটা একসাথে চেপে দাও, তারপর এক্স দিলে চলে যেতে পারে।
হ্যাঁ 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 হ্যাঁ, থ্যাংক ইউ থ্যাংক ইউ। এই যে এইবার খুব সুবিধা হয়েছে। আসলে তোমাদের কাছ থেকে এগুলো শিখতে হবে। এখন দেখো যে ভেরি গুড, এখন দেখো কি হয়েছে। এই যে দেখো, আমরা যেটা বলছিলাম, এইটা হচ্ছে গিয়ে এক্সট্রা ফিউজাল ফাইবার। এই সবগুলা, এই দেখো, এটা হচ্ছে আরো আগে থেকে আসি, একটু আগে থেকে। এখন তোমরা বুঝবে, ওই যে এত কষ্ট করে কর্টিকোস্পাইনাল, রেটিকোস্পাইনাল, রুব্রোস্পাইনাল এগুলো বলেছিলাম না আমরা, এইটা এখন কাজে লাগবে আমাদের। তাহলে এইটা হচ্ছে পিরামিডাল ট্র্যাক্ট। পিরামিডাল ট্র্যাক্টের আপার মোটর নিউরন, এইটা হচ্ছে ইন্টার নিউরন, এটা হচ্ছে লোয়ার মোটর নিউরন। এবং এটা দেখো কোথায় যাচ্ছে, লোয়ার মোটর আলফা, এটা আলফা, আলফা মোটর নিউরন। সো এটা কোথায় যাচ্ছে? ডাইরেক্টলি এক্সট্রা ফিউজাল ফাইবারে যাচ্ছে। ইট ইজ গোয়িং টু ডাইরেক্টলি টু দ্য এক্সট্রা ফিউজাল ফাইবার। তাহলে দেখো, পিরামিডাল ট্র্যাক্টকে কিন্তু এখন আমরা বলবো ইট গোজ টু দ্য এক্সট্রা ফিউজাল ফাইবার থ্রু আলফা মোটর নিউরন। আচ্ছা, এখন আসো, এই যে রেটিকুলোস্পাইনাল, রুব্রোস্পাইনাল, ভেস্টিবুলোস্পাইনাল, অলিভোস্পাইনাল, টেক্টোস্পাইনাল, এগুলো সবই কি হচ্ছে? These are all extrapyramidal tracts. These extrapyramidal tracts also end up in interneurons, which eventually goes to both the sides. দেখো ইন্টারনিউরন গুলো যাচ্ছে, এটা হচ্ছে গামা মোটর নিউরন, এটা হচ্ছে আলফা মোটর নিউরন। তাহলে এই ছবিটা থেকে you can understand from this figure that the extrapyramidal tracts goes both to the alpha motor and gamma motor neurons. মানে gamma motor and alpha motor neurons. But whereas the pyramidal tracts goes only to the alpha motor neurons. এটা ক্লিয়ার হয়েছে? এই ছবিটা দেখো, আবার বলি, এটা কিন্তু খুব একটা ক্লিয়ার কনসেপশন। যে দেখো, pyramidal tracts through interneurons goes to alpha motor neurons only, and which will control the extra fusal fibers only. কিন্তু the extrapyramidal tracts can go to the gamma motor neurons, which will control the intrafusal fibers, or it can also reach the alpha motor neurons, through which it can control the extra